back in force now. They've managed to re-energize the protest. There's very young children, women, older men here. People are singing and dancing. There are many instruments in the square, and it's more full here than it has been in days.
My name is Gene Sharp, and this is the work I do.
What do you do? How would you describe your work?
That's always a problem, describing my work, because it doesn't fit a lot of the people's preconceptions. Primarily, I try to understand the nature and potential of nonviolent forms of struggle to undermine dictatorships.
This is a technique of combat. It is a substitute for war and other violence.
We don't know quite how it spread, but it certainly did into 30-some languages in different parts of the world, on all continents except Antarctica. The famous 198 methods. This seems to have been an extraordinary response. That's simply the 198 specific methods, the specific forms of strike or economic boycott or civil disobedience or protest. Exactly the counterpart of military, different kinds of military guns or bombs in a military struggle. Unless they have something instead of violence and war, they will go back for violence and war every time. I didn't start out to do this. I had a religious background that led me to want to leave the world in a bit of a better place and better condition than when I came here. And how to do that was always a problem. If you can identify the sources of a government's power, such as legitimacy, such as popular support, such as their institutional support. And then you know on what that dictatorship depends for its existence. And since all those sources of power are dependent upon the goodwill, cooperation, obedience, and help of people and institutions, then your job becomes fairly simple. All you have to do is shrink that support and that legitimacy, that cooperation, that obedience, and the regime will be weakened, and if you can take those sources of power away, the regime will fall.
I say nonviolent struggle is armed struggle. And we have to take back that term from those advocates of violence who try to justify with pretty words that kind of combat. Only with this type of struggle, one fights with psychological weapons, social weapons, economic weapons, and political weapons. And that this is ultimately more powerful against oppression, injustice and tyranny than is violence.
I think Vietnam influenced my view about the importance of nonviolent struggle, and particularly the importance of getting Gene Sharp's ideas out to the rest of the world, because we must have an alternative. Vietnam convinced me that we need to have an alternative to killing people. The whole objective of adopting the strategic nonviolent conflict on the part of the democratic opposition was to remove the military dictatorship.
I had gone to Beijing after the Tiananmen Square protests were well underway. That whole event, which it should be remembered, was not just in Beijing, but reportedly in 350 other cities of China. Similar protests were going on, but they were not planned. They were not prepared. There was no strategic decision. There was no advanced decision how long you stay in the square and when you leave. What became very clear to me in retrospect was that the students in the square were operating with great commitment and bravery, but they really didn't know what the hell they were doing. And not expecting miracles, but if you don't treat orchids right or anything else in life, then it's not going to thrive. Atomization is when the regime attempts to make every individual in the society an isolated unit. It's one of the main ways that totalitarian systems seek to control their populations, make them all fear of each other, fearing to speak out and to act together, never telling a neighbor or even sometimes a family member what you really think.
And that's why it's so important that you begin with these very, very low-risk activities so that people can put their foot forward for the first time, put their toe in the water of revolutionary change. That's the foundation that we work on, is changing the obedience patterns, moving the obedience to a willing obedience rather than a coerced obedience. These pillars are holding up the government, like my fingers are holding up this book. And I develop a strategy to undermine each of those pillars: the police, the Sangha, or the religious institutions, the workers, whatever. Every organization. And as they weaken and start to collapse, the government will collapse when those pillars are broken. Ideally, we want those pillars not destroyed, but transferred over to the democratic movement.
If you want these pillars to shift sides, you need to co-opt people. You can co-opt people by two means. If you put a price on what they are doing for the sake of the regime, or give them the clear message that there will be a place for them in the future society. This is exactly what Otpor was done. We were telling the police that we are both victims of the same system. They are pushed to do things they wouldn't like to do. We are pushed to the streets instead of sitting in the classrooms. There is no reason to have war between victims and victims. One victims wear blue uniforms, other victims wear blue jeans, but there is no reason for this conflict. And this worked, really worked. And it worked in Georgia, it worked in Ukraine, it worked in many other places in the world. This is the way you do. You go and co-opt from discursive pillars. You don't throw stones to the police.
There's many people in conflict situations that really would like to use violence, but their opponents really have more military weapons and weapons of violence, which are usually physical weapons, than the potential resistors have. So if the resistors choose to fight with violence, their opponent has all the advantages in that situation because you're choosing to fight with your opponent's best weapons. But you can choose to fight with a totally different kind of weapon than these nonviolent forms, which are much more difficult for the opponent to counteract.
very difficult to build a nonviolent march, because what you need is only one agent provocateur or only one lunatic or drunk person throwing stone at the police. So my question is, you have 20,000 peaceful demonstrators, you have one idiot breaking out the window, and these people got all of the media attention. So this is the message which can efficiently undermine your movement. Big concentration tactics are very difficult to control. To 300,000 people on this square, and there was a non-violent takeover of the physically of this building. Because police disobeyed, because he ordered the military to get from the barracks after 3 p.m. and they disobeyed. This is where he lost the power. What you were looking on the TV and physical overtaking of the building was just the symbol of him losing authority that day.
Це книжка Джина Шарпа «Від диктатури до демократії», і головна думка цієї книжки про те, що з диктатурою слід боротися ненасильницькими засобами, була дуже близькою нам, і це, власне, головна думка, яка сформувала десь протести, які вилилися в 2004 році в...
There has been more done by non-violent struggle to liberate people from communist dictatorships and other kinds of dictatorships than
Gene Sharp, George Bush y sus ideólogos de este golpe suave mecha lenta, señores, este plan de ustedes aquí en Venezuela, olvídense. En último caso, lo que pudiera ocurrir es una explosión revolucionaria jacobina.
when people are slaughtered, when they are beaten. This produces a process of what I call political jiu-jitsu, in which the opponent's supposed strength is used to undermine the opponent by alienating more people from supporting that regime, mobilizing more people into the active resistance.
It's a kind of backlash effect. If the regime is so brutal, then instead of intimidating people, which the regime intends, it causes other population groups and institutions to withdraw their cooperation and their obedience. And that loss of power and control, that more people join.
We see people in many countries and many situations that feel there is nothing they can do, and that the steps they can take are mainly in sort of waiting for an external group to assist them in their liberation or to come in and help them by some means. And what this work does is show people that they themselves can be responsible for their own future, for their own liberation.
People are beginning to liberate themselves. You know, they don't have to depend on an outside power. This is Sergei, my cat, named after Sergei Popovich. But they don't have to depend on an outside power. They can do it themselves. And can you imagine how good that makes a country feel? That we did it ourselves. And that's why it's so important that we transfer the skill and knowledge.
قدروا إنه قبل الثورة يكسبوا الجيش والشرطة معاهم. احنا مختلفين شوية، احنا الشرطة كان طبعا معركة كبيرة جدا، والجيش كان واقف على الحياد طول الوقت واتدخل لصالحنا في نهاية المطاف يعني. فتجربة مختلفة إلى حد كبير بيننا وبين تجربة أطبر في صربيا.
I saw the developments in Egypt, I was quite amazed because they seemed so determined. They were being nonviolent. They, time and time again, asserted, I'm not afraid. And many people are saying, I'm not afraid.
التكنولوجيا كان لها دور كبير جدا في التواصل بصورة أسرع، في توصيل الرسائل للناس كلها وحشدهم أحيانا. كان في دور للتكنولوجيا عن طريق التنظيم الداخلي. ساعات كنا مثلا عندك مجموعات في المحافظات، فأنت عايز تكون على تواصل دائم بمجموعاتك في المحافظات، فبدل ما نعمل اجتماع كل أسبوعين لرؤوس المحافظات، أنت ممكن عن طريق الفيسبوك، عن طريق سيكريت جروب على الفيسبوك، عن طريق كونفرنس على الياهو او على سكايب او على بالتوك، عن اي برنامج نستخدمه للتواصل باستمرار. كل الحاجات دي ساعدت كتير عن طريق. لكن ايه اللي خلى الجيش يساندنا في الاخر؟ اعتقد ان الجيش اصلا من الناس، يعني مجندين الجيش جزء من الشعب، والجيش ليه دور وطني كبير جدا. الشرطه قد يكون لها دور في تزوير الانتخابات، في حمايه الفاسدين، فمتورطين من سنين طويله، وبالتالي يدافع عن مصالحهم وعن بقائهم. شغال على تلفزيون بصوت عالي.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أيها المواطنون، في هذه الظروف العصيبة التي تمر بها البلاد، قرر الرئيس محمد حسني مبارك تخليه عن منصب رئيس الجمهورية
خطاب التنحي، فجننت لما سمعت الخطاب يعني.
There's one thing that's been learned in quotation marks, maybe from Tunisia and Egypt, which I think is a mistake, major mistake, and that is that the existing ruler has to resign. He doesn't have to resign. You take all the supports from under him, he falls. Well, no matter what he wants to do. This is the distinction in the analyses between nonviolent coercion, in which he has to resign, but he's forced into it, and disintegration, when the regime simply falls apart. There's nobody left with enough power to resign. And if you're constantly waiting for a very stubborn so-and-so to resign, it may prolong the time he stays in some control. And even at the end, if he resigns under conditions, as he did in Egypt, that still gives him some control, even after he's physically gone from the palace.
But because of what they... If Einstein was the genius in physics, so Gene Sharp is the genius in freedoms and how to achieve freedoms.
I feel good in a way that we're spreading the word, and if people follow Gene's advice on how to think about waging a nonviolent struggle, sooner or later they'll win. See, the advantage that we have using this form of struggle, the people against the tyrant, as long as we don't surrender, we never lose. And that's key. As long as you haven't given up, you haven't lost.